Hello, hello, hello. Hello, 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 hello. Admit all. I'm just going to
Can
wait.
hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Can hear you,
Okay,
yes.
good.
Definitely
Yes,
hear you.
how are you?
And you can see me?
I'm Adil from Baghdad.
Could see you, not anymore.
Oh, my camera's on.
Yes, now we can see you again.
Okay, good. I'm just waiting for a few more people to come in. Let's see here. Let's see who else is here. Not joining. Oh, okay. I'm just admitting all. We've got 27 so far. 28. Henry 14. Admit all. Okay. I'm not going to be able to see this. I want to make somebody else co-host here. I'm going to pick on somebody. Let me pick on somebody. Jessica. Can I make you co-host, Jessica Steinkoff?
Yeah, sure, that's fine, Neville. I can
I'm
only
doing
stay
it.
for an hour, so
Okay, well,
unfortunately.
that's cool. By then, everyone will have joined us. So let's just make sure everybody's here. And everybody please mute, including Sue Lane and
Where am I? Mute.
and Legion 5. Please mute. Malebo's here. Malebo, I'm going to make you co-host as well. Make co-host. Okay. So when I start, I won't be able to see hands and I won't be able to see Nesrin, please will you mute? I need to kind of manage the presentation. Okay. All right. So hello, everybody. It's a reunion we're having. I'm going to go to a presentation and then I'll ask my co-hosts just to admit people in the waiting room. I didn't try to want to make it automatic participation. So thanks very much, everybody. This is a sort of a follow-up from our event. And yesterday I sent a document around. There's Peliwe. So I've got most of my team here. I think he's Joanette here, Peliwe, Malebo are all here. So there are 36 people in the room and we're going to record this anyway. So let me just explain that what we did was we took all of the comments that we received by email, which were extensive. We read through those carefully and made notes on some of those and then try to group those notes into different themes. And then we then translated that into kind of a set of comments. It was quite difficult for us to be absolutely comprehensive without going into too much detail. So we had to kind of editorialize and edit some of the thinking. And so some of the very specific ideas and suggestions might not have made it into the final document. And some of the inferences we drew were kind of editorial. And so we've produced this document, but will not make it official until such time as we've accounted for any comments that you have. In this meeting today, I'm going to present to you just the recommendations that we've extracted out of all of this thinking, and then offer the opportunity for some headline comments and discussion here, which we will try to incorporate, but really prefer that you comment in writing. And as I said in the email we sent out yesterday, the writing that we want to get back from you should be as succinct as possible. Try to avoid broad additional commentary and rather comment on what's there or what's not there, perhaps, and then also refer to the sections in the document that you want to comment on. And then we will try to incorporate that into a final version, which we will then make as our document, so to speak, from the conference. Okay, so I'm now going to go. Just let me just check that my team doesn't have any forward comments before we present. Anything from Peliwe, Guy is here, Joanette, Malebo, anything to add? Okay, in which case I'm going to go to the presentation, and I now no longer can see the hands or the control panel, so that's now up to everybody else. Okay, okay, so these are the draft kind of takeaways from the meeting, and those are the people I'm crediting for assisting in getting that. It includes all of you. Malebo, I've left your name out here. Sorry about that. That shouldn't be. That's my error. Malebo's name should be one of the contributors to this. Okay, so the document kind of starts with some broad areas which we extracted, some general thinking around this, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just to whip through the kind of broad thinking. I see I'm getting admissions coming up here. So I'll just put up these 4 points. Why are we doing this? Why are we concerned with this? And considering extreme events to be the kind of leading edge of climate change, which kind of takes us into new territory, especially with breaching records in extreme events as they are trending, and describing them as anomalous exaggerations of seasonal signals, such as extreme or excess rainfall, or even rainfall failure, as the case may be. So they are generally departures or anomalies of what might be the normal seasonal range. They occur at timescales that have gosh, I'm getting messages here from AI. They occur at timescales that have direct impact on people's lives and livelihoods, time and space scales, and they're obviously very varied in terms of their extent, their location, and their timing, as whether to seasonal scale, as well as the kinds of different events we have. And of course, they are trending ostensibly in many ways, in frequency, in the seasonality, in the strength, in the duration, and extent of these things. I'm going to pop over that slide. And then there are lots of properties of extreme events that we have to consider, things like the climate mode drivers, which are more of a global scale influence on how they manifest. There are the weather systems themselves that produce extreme events, meteorological conditions like cold fronts, cut-off lows, tropical storms, pressure systems, dynamics, winds, etc., etc. Then there are the actual parameters that result in extreme events, such as air temperature or rainfall or sea state or wind speed, etc., etc. And then there are the translation of those into natural disasters, which are floods, droughts, heat waves, tornadoes, windstorms, coastal inundation, fires, cold snaps, and other kinds of them. So we've kind of identified that there are different elements or properties to understand in looking at this. And then there's the impact of these, and we're distinguishing here between the impact, such as an example would be a flood that knocks over a bridge. And then there are consequences, which are what does that mean in terms of lives, livelihoods, property, infrastructure, ecosystems, and ecosystem services. So those are the kind of different bits and pieces. And then make the point quite strongly that not all extreme events result in natural disasters, and not all natural disasters emanate from extreme events. So you could still have a flood, even though it's in the normal range of rainfall, for example. And then note the fact that tolerance thresholds are very different for different sectors, for different businesses, for different operations, for different livelihoods, for different dwellings, for different communities, so that not any a magnitude of disaster has the same effect on different elements of our communities and society. Okay. Then we speak a little bit about the definitions here. So what do we really mean when we say extreme climate? And so we have to distinguish and define things in terms of extreme climate conditions. So for example, I don't know if I make this example later, we talk about extreme climate conditions being things like, okay, we have I forget what the technical term is, but a berg wind, meaning a warm offshore wind, which might lead to conditions that lead to a natural disaster like a fire, but we need to define what distinguish between those different conditions and the actual event, and then we have to define what we mean by impact of natural disasters, destruction, and lives, and the consequences of those impacts. So we need to really get our terminology really clearly defined. And then another element which we identify as sort of general comment is to understand whether, in fact, if and how they are intensifying. Are they intensifying in the parameters such as frequency, duration, magnitude, seasonal shifts, novel distributions of them? Are they changing in terms of the damage that we're seeing? And is that damage changing because of more intense events like we've just described, or because of increasing trends in vulnerability, in other words, more in harm's way, or both of the above, or in what proportion these are changing? And so these are also very important fundamental kind of considerations. I'm going to skip over this slide, in which we make the contention that without these definitions and clearly defining an index which addresses this variety of different parameters, it's difficult to track them. Even though we have definitions of extreme events like heat waves, it might not work across the full scope. And this is critical for attribution of loss and damage, and also to justify investments in research. Okay, then just generally kind of breaking down the thinking around the different components of managing ECEs. So we start, but not necessarily have to start, with climate science, and recognize that there are different applications of climate science to develop suitable information and data products which are applicable in a variety of different ways, one of which is forecasting and early warning systems, but also there are other risk and vulnerability applications that the climate science can produce. And then following the forecasting route to developing early warning systems. And there's a lot of discussion in the content about the kinds of early warning systems and the resolution of warning systems and how they can be tailored for particular types of applications of early warning systems, which leads us to the very large conversation around communication and education and what the early warning system should contain. We obviously do have impact, a lot of impact work that's being done, impact forecasts, but there was also a lot of discussion at the conference about response options and what people should do, not just that they're aware of the hazard, but what they should be doing as well. And then who does this go to? And obviously there's a great deal of discussion about target sectors and user communities. And again, I've already mentioned, horizontal and vertical applications of all of this to particular types of users and being sensitive to the variety of that. But importantly, the DRM, the disaster risk management sector itself, needs information which is important to communicate in particular ways. And so that's a whole set of communities. And then together that if you want users and stakeholders all need to feed back this information to every element of this management system. And so that's kind of an iteration of what we kind of extract out of this. make the point that by nature, this is multidisciplinary, trans-institutional, trans-departmental, trans-sectoral, and for this, we need a broad strategy to address this. Okay. I think a point which is worth making is that we as a society, as a community, as researchers, as practitioners, are not so much going to stop ECWEs. I want to just make that point, very fundamental point. We've changed the term from ECEs to ECWEs, meaning extreme climate and weather events, just to be sure that we cover both aspects. So this is wrong. So we're not going to stop ECWEs from happening or from having impact and consequence. What is our goal? Our goal is then to adapt to these, which means to reduce potential impact and consequence, and to fund the recovery, to look at recovery. So that's really what we want to try to achieve. And then what we did was, okay, so I'm going to go through the recommendations next and explain a little bit about what we've extracted out of them. But I want to say that the one element which is very clear to us is the question of data availability, and this is not just climate data availability; it's all kinds of data. And I think an important message from this meeting is that it's fundamental to have all data freely and easily available to all role players in this. Now, as I indicated, this is from the Miro board that we used as our tool for organizing the information we gathered. And so there are lots of different categories, and we try to kind of consolidate and then reconsolidate to try to synthesize this. And so I'm going to go through, there are 14 recommendations that we extracted out of this as our draft set. And the one fundamental one was about how to be organized around this managing and dealing with extreme climate and weather events. And so what we did was produce a sort of like template draft straw dog idea of a commission. Now, a lot of these recommendations, I need to say, are quite focused on South Africa, where the conference was held. And we've already discussed the idea of taking this document and kind of de-domesticating it and making it more of a global value. So excuse the fact that these are really focused on South Africa, but this might be an idea which is of universal value. And the idea is to have some sort of, I use the term here, commission. It could be anything, a working group, a committee, whatever it might be. It needs to be housed in a particular location. And we've basically identified the various different elements of this, which to ensure that all of the different elements are there. If they get consolidated or how they get translated into practice, should this recommendation find a fertile ground to manifest, how this gets applied is to be developed. But the idea is that we need to be organized and we need to consider these different elements around this. The second recommendation refers to this idea, and we propose from this that this shouldn't be standalone, that we have the policy in South Africa of the National Framework for Climate Services, and this could possibly be integrated into the idea of the National Framework for Climate Services as one potential layer within it, because the framework really does cover many or most of these aspects. We also recommend that an index or a set of indices which can be used to assess the trends in ECWEs historically and in the future and projected incidents and impact, which can account for the range of drivers, impacts, and consequences. So looking at weather systems, at climate modes, at vulnerability. So it's a proper index, but that can also account for things like the cost impacts, which are sensitive to changes over time. So developing a set of indices that can be used to kind of track the trends is necessary. We also propose the idea of a directed research program, which can be established by or led by key partners, using the model of potentially what we have already started in South Africa, the Research Alliance. But it's important that this should be commissioned research, so not open-ended research, to address specific questions on all aspects relevant to the scope. So not just the climate science, to be clear, but the full scope of research that's required. And very important that this is based on open data policy, where tools and data can be made available. 4.5 then is that we want to propose to have a regular meeting around this topic, potentially organized by SASAS. I think I've written that wrong. SASAS or some other suitable organization that can hold this as a kind of regular meeting or regular update. This is also, a lot of this is fairly intuitive, but nevertheless needs to be written down. And that is that we need user and stakeholder consultation fora that should be established. We've written here at high resolution in terms of stakeholders, sectors. In other words, we need to be, when we talk about sectors themselves might not be detailed enough. We might need to go to levels of business associations or specific communities or specific regions or specific groups of stakeholders. We have to think about how we do this at the right level and get the balances right. And they should be sensitive to the idea of understanding what the thresholds are, so that the information produced out of the science and the forecasting can be sensitive to those thresholds. And again, we suggest that the user interface platforms that are envisaged in the National Framework for Climate Services is a good way to potentially do this. On the data question, we've been succinct and said that an urgent and robust attempt must be made to develop a policy and funding mechanisms and a host institution to manage all relevant data that can be made free and easy to access. This is a fundamental and clear statement. 4.8 is that we develop an assessment of observational needs that are specific to ECWEs. Now, we have in South Africa and in many other countries, and India as an example, very extensive observation networks. In our case, it's quite disaggregated. There are different institutions, both public and private, that have those observation networks, and those are broad in scope in their application, but potentially we might need quite specific observations. They might, for example, need to be mobile or deployed in particular instances. And so this assessment should be made for that in terms of hardware, software, human capacity, data management, institutional arrangements. And so a model for integrating these observations across the public and private entities should be devised and implemented. 4.9 is work on further development of forecasting at a range of early warning systems, as discussed previously, which might be bespoke or tailored for specific applications, to provide information at varying resolutions in space and time, should be commissioned. 10 is that disaster risk and prevention processes and mechanisms and operations should be clearly distributed and devolved among role players with roles and responsibilities clearly defined. And we know that quite a lot of this does exist, but perhaps there's an awareness question here, and perhaps it needs to be thought about again in terms of the range of different kinds of ECWEs, or in the kinds of vulnerabilities in regions or districts that might be different from each other. So we might need to just think about that again. Critically is to consider work on how we assess economic impacts. And we need to develop methodologies. This is so critical, both for loss and damage, as well as to look at what are the downstream consequences, so we get a good view of what the economic impacts of these different kinds of ECWEs are. And again, the geographic distribution to justify investments in adaptation activities. 4.12 is again about adaptation and recovery and relief finance, in particular, what finance mechanisms do exist and how should they be arranged and deployed, and what policies is required around this for emergency funding and relief aid, for example, and recovery. 13 is about funding the program as a whole. So there was quite a lot of discussion about different sources of funding, both local and international, and how to organize that needs to be considered. And then the final one is, just because I'm superstitious, I didn't want to end on 13, so I made 14. Okay, so now I have gone through everything I have to share with you on the assumption that the document itself is in your hands. And just to repeat what I said at the beginning for our latecomers, this document is now in draft form, and we have invited comment from all of you on the document. We ask that that comment be succinct and that it be less about broad opinions and new information, rather a critique of what is written in that document with specific reference to the different sections where you would like to suggest changes. And obviously, we will try to include as much of that comment as we can. We'll give you a week for that at the absolute latest, okay? We want to start integrating comment as soon as possible. Okay, so I have spoken a little bit about what's in the document. I'm going to just ask my team members, Malebo, Peliwe, Joanette, and Guy, if they want to just say anything before we open the floor for some discussion. So any of the team members have anything to say, just unmute and speak, please. Well, let me just ask you, Guy, anything? Nope. Assuming silence is no. Peliwe, anything you want to add? Malebo, Joanette? No.
No, nothing from me.
Okay. Cool. All right. So let's have a go. Oh, Peliwe? You're unmuted. Peliwe, do you want to say something? Can't hear you if you are speaking. No. I'm going to take that as a no.
Yeah.
Okay. Peliwe, you back? Oh, you got a connection quality problem there, I think. Okay. All right. So let's go with opening the floor. Let's take a couple of questions, comments, compliments, anything you have to say at this stage, and then we'll get some discussion going. If you have a question, please put up your hand and I'll let you speak. Don't be shy. I will say to you that I've already got, I've seen your hand, Melanie, got one set of comments back, which were very useful. So maybe, Stefan, if you want to say something. Oh, Guy is calling me. Guy, I can't take your call now. Maybe he's trying to tell me to look at my WhatsApp. Okay. Let me just check my WhatsApp. He can't unmute. Maybe nobody can unmute. Oh.
1, 2, 1, 2. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. But
Good,
let me get
so
Guy. I'm going to see if I can get Guy to unmute. Unmute, unmute, unmute. Guy, ask to unmute. For some reason, Guy can't unmute. Can anybody else unmute besides you? Melanie,
I can
you can
unmute,
unmute.
Neville.
Yeah? Stefan can unmute.
I can unmute.
Yeah, seems like everybody can unmute except you,
Yes.
Guy. Do you want to phone me and tell me what your story is, and then I can try and patch you in? Guy?
Or perhaps try to rejoin again.
Yeah. Okay, he's calling me. Let me just accept his call. Okay, I've got you, Guy. You're on speakerphone.
I was going to say I don't have anything to say, but I can't unmute. I don't say anything yet.
Okay.
In chat.
Okay.
But I'll get out and come back in.
Okay. Cool. All right.
I think it's rather take inputs from everybody.
Yes.
I think we've said.
Okay, cool. Okay. So Melanie, the floor is yours.
Yes, so general feedback, I think it's a nice document. So and some comments which you made, I think is kind of domain specific. So as I'm usually working more on the risk reduction and vulnerability assessment, so I picked up that some of the data or processes were demanded as missing in the document, which are existing, but which might be out of the awareness of the climate modelers. So I will add these and I will comment on the document afterwards. So it's also funding sources, for instance, just to give you an idea. A lot of funding can come in climate adaptation, specifically from mainstreaming activities. So it's a lot, and yeah, I think also your research can probably be covered by existing funding pots. We just have to integrate it into the governance programs. And this again speaks that there needs to be this transdisciplinary approach of working across silos. And yeah, so I just wanted to mention that, and I will make more specific comments on the doc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can mute. Stefan, can you unmute?
Actually, good morning, Dr. Neval.
Yes, Nesrin, please.
Hi. Generally, the report is concise and covers all the topics that we are addressed during the 3 days conference. But I have, I think the recommendation 411, because it's my research in this recommendation specifically, I have few comments and I will be added to this document. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Please, will you respond by email and make sure that that's in writing so we can capture that?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I see Kogi's hand, and let me give Kogi the floor. Kogi.
Morning, Neville. Morning to all of you here. Neville and team, I think it's great that you've got such a good attendance to the session. That means that this is really something that's of interest and of value to the system as a whole. So I think that's a great, thumbs up for this. My comment, Neville, is based on my closeness to the recent tornado in Tonga. 265 kilometers per hour tornado, completely unpredicted. And this is a community of very elderly folk who don't have the means of responding or planning a response or getting something together. So within that context, for me, one of the things that this document needs to include is something around that community aspect, because it has to be science for society. And for me, I'm not sure how to bring it in, but I think that's an important notion to bring in. The one that's really particularly close to me is around what is the technology solutions landscape for extreme events? If we could get some kind of scoping idea around that and see what are the technologies that are available to us in Africa, South Africa, that would be very useful for two reasons. For one, I'm involved with the United Nations Framework Convention Climate Technology Network. So that's an implementing arm of the UNFCCC, right? And they provide technical assistance to developing countries to respond to these kinds of things. So if there's a component that comes out of this conference that we could package as a proposal to them, that would be a really good way forward for me, I think, in terms of trying to start implementing some of these goals in the document. The second recommendation, guys, is around linking the research component to not just hardcore research, the society stuff, but like I mentioned as well, what is the technology landscape on this and what is the low-hanging fruit or ideas or technologies that we can start exploring and sharing in the region and even across the region as well. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Kogi. I think we should take a bit more points before we respond. I mean, I'm not sure I'm in position to respond to you. I think those are great ideas, and I think please will you make sure that you write that down for us to include. I just want to note that some of you here were at a meeting earlier this week, which was held by the National Disaster South African National Disaster Management Center, and they also spoke about the tornado. For those that don't know, there was a tornado, which is an unusual experience in South Africa. This one was filmed from all angles, and it was really traumatic for a lot of people. And so it's come up a lot as an example. And there was discussion about the right kind of technology. And some people who were less experienced in this were asking, why was the tornado not forecast? And the answer to that was that conditions that are suitable for such an event were forecast, but that the event manifestation itself cannot be forecast. So that was an interesting discussion. But indeed, the technologies might and do exist. So I think that's very helpful. Thank you. I don't want to editorialize right now. Guy's hand is up. So Guy, do you want to speak, please?
I want to say that's a great input, and I do think it gives us a sense that, you know, some kind of technology work stream is going to be valuable. Obviously not, you know, we don't want to be purely technology focused. We've also got to think about, you know, local indigenous knowledge and all those sorts of things, how they integrate. But some kind of technology work stream is going to be valuable because it also sets us up for engaging with the tech transfer discussions in the UNFCCC, funding needs, all that kind of stuff. And then that can generate some real, some concrete suggestions that can go into, you know, South Africa's national communication and you know, biennial reports. So yeah, I think a technology work stream of some kind springs to mind. Thanks, Cody.
I remember to say that the conference can only report on what the conference spoke about. This meeting will count as part of the conference. And your comments will count as part of the conference. But we shouldn't really be generating new stuff. What we can do, though, and should do, is to identify where there is necessary development needed. So, for example, in this case, I do think that the idea that somebody needs to be tasked from the conference to deal with the question that Kogi is raising can be included. Guy, you have a comment on that comment. Go ahead.
I think we should take full advantage of the fact that this is kind of an extension of the conference.
Yes.
And that it is a chance for all the delegates, having shared a wide variety of ideas. I mean, you know, to distill these ideas, it's a phenomenal range of ideas that we've gone through. And now having presented it back to the community to get these sort of more integrated synthetic insights is going to be valuable. So I don't really, you know, I don't see that we should close off opportunity to adjust our report, but we could say that this flows from the feedback section.
Yes,
but we should just capture as much as we can.
No, indeed, we will and should. I think what I mean is, you know, when we say that there's a need for the further development of early warning systems at a particular resolution, that it's not the conference that's going to do it, but we're going to ask that it gets done. So I think we have to get that right. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Other comments? Stefan, do you want to talk about your written response that you sent to me very efficiently? Are you still here, Stefan? Not particularly. Okay. Well, you know, we'll look at them. I mean, I want to pick on one, if I may, which I think is important. And Stefan pointed out that asking for early warning systems to be produced needs to be considerate of the fact that there is legislation around that. So, for example, in South Africa, warnings can only officially be issued by the South African Weather Service. And I think one of the conversations we did have in plenary at the conference was the fact that we do need to have one voice. But the legislation around that needs to be very clear about how we disseminate that kind of information and how that information gets filtered and gets bespoke. So if we are expanding early warning systems, we need to be cognizant of the policy around that, for example. So that's another item which I think was a valuable contribution. That's just one of, I think, 5 comments that you made, Stefan. I hope I did truth to you. I don't see any other hands just yet. Let me see if there are any other hands or anyone that has an opinion to share. Stefan put his thumb up. That's good. So he acknowledges my interpretation of his work. And
Hi, Neville.
yes, Hilke, hi.
I'm struggling to find where my hand is.
Don't worry, you
I
can go
don't know
ahead.
what happened.
You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I thought maybe on the point that you just made about who should send warnings and who shouldn't do what and the legislations in place. We need maybe also at this document to start thinking of how do we mainstream the proposed recommendations into the legislation or the processes that are in place, mainly into this political stream or the government streams. Because at times when maybe things have developed further, that's the time they start looking for place within the available legislation. But if already our recommendations are starting to see how do we mainstream this and which instruments should we start with, then we will not have a challenge of only wanting to say, okay, we have the early warnings. How do we make them part of those who are mandated to do the warnings? How can they buy into the warnings that we will come up with?
I think, Hilke, that what you point out is that our recommendations are a little bit light on policy and legislative development. And I think that might kind of be an assumption that we're all making. It also speaks to whom we deliver these recommendations and whose responsibility it is to react to them. I want to say that this whole initiative on our part had buy-in from in South Africa, in particular, senior stakeholders, and meaning departmental government departments. SAWS was obviously very much part of it, but their mothership is DFFE, Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. The Department of Science and Innovation is involved. Nationally, the Disaster Risk Management from COGTA was involved here. And so, we have to deliver it to them, and so they have to respond to it. But I think marrying these 2 points, it's important that we do, in fact, speak a bit more about policy and legislation. So if any of you have comments on that particular point, and Hilke, if you would articulate that to us in writing, that would be very helpful. Thank you. I know that, I think it was Mark Kaplan that sent a message. I can't see the messages. Wants to say something. So Mark, you can go ahead.
Hi, greetings everybody. Good to hear, good to see how many people have turned out for this event. Well done to Neville and the team. I just wanted to say that I'm concerned about the way we need to market our thoughts and our efforts on this document, and that we need to be able to reach the right decision makers, and we need to think about what type of electronic media is most appropriate. Obviously, it's the cultural differences across not only across countries but also across regions and sub-regions. but if we're looking mainly at the politicians, we should be thinking about, do they spend a lot of time on their cell phones? Maybe we have to send them short messages, that type of thing. I'm concerned that we're going to have a very long document, and then we have something like this tornado event, and then people forget about it, and it can happen again. And what type of media we're using. So we've got a long document that we're progressing towards, but we actually need to also have, as Neville says, some sort of funding to have some a document, not a document, but some sort of a feedback mechanism that will be electronic. Thank you.
Thanks. Melanie has just popped up a message saying a policy brief would be a good idea. We have to get balances right here. We are a self-organized grouping of people, but we do have the attention of government. And I think extreme events have a way of, Hilke, this is addressed to you, extreme events have a way of becoming politicized quite quickly, especially when they affect communities and affect voters. Unfortunately, our election has just passed, so that area is dead for now. But there are local government elections coming up. But my point being that I think what extreme events has the advantage of being very real to people. And based on the press interest in us, unfortunately, as I say, we coincided with the election in South Africa. So we were kind of clouded or shrouded by the election news. But we are developing a press statement, which is going to be based on the final document. And then ultimately, I think a lot of it's going to depend on the energy of us as a community to make sure that this doesn't lapse. And so we are going to be able to, so we are planning meetings with the key stakeholders to deliver this document to them. And we'll have to sustain the energy around ensuring that this does get the attention. Ultimately, it is the key stakeholders who have the responsibility to manage this that are going to have to take it forward. As a community of people, we can make a noise about it and continue to do the work we do. But your point is taken, Mark. Thank you. Let's just see if there are any other additional comments or questions or critiques or concerns. I see Ryan Blanchard has raised his hand. So Ryan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi Neville, hi everyone. Just a quick comment from my side, reading the document. You mentioned that ecological infrastructure is a consequence of loss and damage of extreme events, but in some cases, the degradation of ecological infrastructure can intensify the outcomes or the impacts. So that might be something worth considering, and I think 1 or 2 discussions, presentations touched on that. So that could be something to raise as well, to minimize the impacts of an extreme event, is to maintain
an example of
risk.
that would be like wetlands absorbing flood water, for example.
Yeah, coastal dunes. So I mean, that speaks to development in the right areas and buffer zones, and ultimately
yes,
preserving biodiversity in some instances. But yeah, yes, just a comment. Thank you.
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. Again, I'm urging you to put that in writing. So, I'm always kind of stuck between the idea of saying, how comprehensive are we? Are we going to provide the blueprint for management here, or are we going to suggest that these kinds of issues need to be developed further? In other words, how do we stage this process? But I would rather be inclusive than omit something. So important that we capture that particular notion. And I see there was a comment. I can't see my comments. Where are my comments? Here's my chat. Agreement. Ryan's point. Nicola said Ryan's point is so important. So that's noted too. Thank you. Okay. Let's see.
Hi, Neville.
Yes.
Sorry, I was busy typing and then I realized that, it's probably easier just to speak.
Please do.
I haven't had a chance to go through the document yet, but I will do that. And I think then try to make that point that Ryan is making in terms of how development proceeds and also what the role of the national environment can be to make sure that that is reflected in the document, because I do think it's important. And then I also just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity and bringing us all together, because I think this kind of emphasis on extreme events is such a helpful point for connecting society and hardcore scientists and practitioners around a conversation where everyone just throws their hands up and says there's nothing we can do. But I mean, this actually provides something that public can understand and something that we can then start to work around trying to find solutions.
Indeed, I agree with that, Nicola. I mean, I think this is why we kind of initiated the idea of a focus on extreme events, because they are so interconnecting. They are so multidisciplinary in nature, and they really do make a good way for us to do the adaptation work and the research that we need and all of the stuff that we need to do, not just for extreme events, but it's a good way to learn how to do it. I think it's a good way to bring that focus together. You made another point that I wanted to respond to, and I've forgotten what it was. So you were just saying, how we have to account for development questions, for example. And again, we have to find the balance between being generic in our kind of recommendation with our very specific focus on particular elements of that work. So when we talk about, for example, a research plan, I think this speaks to Janine's comment as well, which is next in the chat. Is we talk about end-to-end research, how we then sort of deconstruct or disentangle that research scope also needs to be thought about. So, and again, many of these things are very interactive, and we have to kind of feel our way here to get it organized in such a way that we can account for everything without becoming too disaggregated. That was a kind of a bizarre comment, but anyway, that was my point. Let me just go back to the chat. Janine, how to keep momentum. Go ahead. Oh, is that Peliwe?
Hello?
Yes.
Oh. Yes, that's me. Can you
Go
hear
ahead.
me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, that's good. I just wanted to remind everyone that in this group, it would be great that we come up with the task force that is going to take, the steps that we are proposing. Hold the process and as inclusive and as diverse as it can be, representing different sectors and different institutions. So let's just bear that in mind, that we are targeting getting a task force team basis to discuss the other details that will follow.
Peliwe, you kind of sort of broke up a little bit in that point, but I think
Yes,
what you're saying is that this is a good community of people to kind of implement a task force. So and then related to my response to your comment is Kogi's point, which is to whom is this document directed? So what we did say at the beginning of the event was that the outputs of this will be delivered to key stakeholders here in South Africa, but also this document in its more global iteration, which we still have to draft or extract out of this, would also be delivered to some of the international organizations that participated here, such as the WMO, Scope, NAM, S&T, who all have their own networks. But the question of mandate becomes important here. certainly this community has the right to organize itself as it likes. Its authority in producing outputs is only valid if there's a commission or a mandate to do so. So I think it's really important that we robustly communicate this to our principal organizations that do have the authority. What I would hope would happen is that they would be receptive to the idea to consider these seriously. I certainly know the National Disaster Management Center wants to consider how to integrate this, and much of their meeting on the other day, looking at the situation on a quarterly basis, is really about extreme events. So there are definite interests in it. I feel, just again speaking for myself, that confidently getting organized around research, for example, is one element of this broader approach, and that any researchers have the right to get organized around. So, that's an area where I would like to drive my particular interest in this. And I say research again, I emphasize end-to-end research. And any of the stakeholders can get organized. But for the superstructure, so to speak, I think we do need to have authoritative people involved. That's my view. And this is what that recommendation is really talking about. It's talking about, I'm just going to see if I can minimize here. It's talking about what elements need to be considered in some sort of structure, in some sort of program. Exactly how this lands, I'm not sure that we can determine, but we can certainly try and pressurize. Let me just see if there are any other comments or hands, because I can't see while I'm presenting. Just stop sharing. Okay, Kogi, I hope that answers your question as well. There's a hand there from Mel. Mel, ready?
Good morning, Neville and colleagues. May I start off by saying thank you very much for this well-captured document. You and your team are extremely applauded. Neville, the point of clarity, perhaps, in terms of some of the major discussions that we had during this event, also extended beyond the response and recovery avenue. Your recommendations on point 8, for example, looked at the adaptation, and more so in terms of post-disaster, looking at response and recovery. I think equally important is for us to incorporate the critical components of disaster risk reduction, looking at risk mitigation and preparedness. And I think as part of the deliberations that we had within the small breakaway sessions, that was high on the agenda. And I think if you look at the presentations as well, the issue is that, are we identifying these risks sufficiently and adequately in advance? And what are some of these measures that we are taking in terms of mitigating, in terms of, the risk reduction avenue, rather than having for us to adapt post-disaster? And I think that area needs to be enhanced within this document itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mal. I'm very glad you've said that, and that's exactly why we wanted to do this meeting. So it's really in your hands to ensure that you write that down and we can include it appropriately. Thank you. But I agree with you, actually. Good. Folks, we needn't drag this out, but I'm happy to take further comment if there is any at this stage. I don't see any other hands just yet. Let me see. No other hands. Okay. Stefan says, I think it'd be more appropriate or honest to present the document as a product of the organizers, extensively informed by the input of all participants. I take your point. Stefan, I think you might be feeling uncomfortable that we've done quite a fair amount of interpretation of what we've got here. And I think we can make that clearer. That is, in fact, what we have done. Good. Okay, well. Okay, so if there is no further comment, then it's really up to the rest of you guys to ensure, please only send substantive comments. If you have niggles, try and contain those, because we're trying to reduce the volume of work we have to do. But if you have some substantive comments, and we've heard several today, please do feel free to send those. And failing any other hands, I'm going to assume that everybody is happy with this. Oh, I do want to make one other point here, and that's about publications. There were 37 people who indicated that they would be willing to make their presentations into a paper to submit to our special issue. And I have all your names, but I will send that information out to everybody, because everybody's welcome to do so. But I do want to push those that said they were interested in doing so. The special issue is almost ready for submission, meaning that there's a portal on the journal webpage that you have to submit it to. But I will send an email out to everybody in that regard, to ensure that the information is well understood. And if you have any questions, I think Charlotte, myself, and Suri are going to be the guest editors for that special edition. And so that is in process. I was hoping that the portal would be ready by today, but it isn't quite. Okay. Somebody's written here from Sue. Sue, do you want to say what you're thinking? Do you want to express that in words, Sue?
I will.
Thank you.
Neville, I will, yes. It's just simply that it's really important to get clarity about who is going to track capacity to respond at horizontally and vertically. And that needs to be recorded, because that's where there are going to be difficulties, the most difficulties.
Yes. Yes.
Starting right from now, little events happening right now and into the future, the capacities to respond differ so widely. It's a huge concern. Who's going to track it?
Yeah, so Sue, one of the recommendations speaks to looking again at disaster risk management, which is done regionally, but potentially not always by the various hazards and the priority hazards and the likelihoods of those hazards happening in those places. And I do know that disaster risk management is fairly well capacitated, but your point about the capacity needed needs to be thought through from a sort of end-to-end basis. It's not just the rescue people and other skills that might be required in the time. Thanks, Nicola. But it's also all of the upstream and potentially downstream capacity that's needed. And I want to say, maybe Dawn can back me up here, why I am so attracted to the National Framework for Climate Services, because all of the elements are quite intuitively built into this framework for climate services. And fundamental to climate services, the kind of one overarching pillar of climate services is capacity building and capacity development, which is to make sure that all of the capacity, from the kind of observations of climate and climate science right through to the on the ground activities, is anticipated as necessary. So I think it is there, and I think, Sue, again, I'm going to urge you to make your point in writing, please.
Okay, Neville, I will. I just want to say that it's just from traveling around South Africa, just even our own country, the evidence of urban and regional planning that somebody else has brought up, and new developments being promoted in floodplains and in all sorts of areas which are extremely in danger of being hammered by sea level rise and floods. I haven't seen much evidence of local authorities doing much.
So you're talking
I'm
about
sure there is a lot being done, but there's a lot that needs to be done, and it isn't.
Sure. I mean, there's one, as we know, famously in South Africa, policy is one thing, implementation is another. Maybe Melanie, if you're still here, you can say something about coastal development and policy around that. I'm not sure if you're still here, Melanie. I know Melanie works in that area. She might not still be here. But point taken, Sue, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any more comments, questions, critiques? Really steady? Okay, if not, I'm going to say thank you all very much for participating in this meeting. And I'm looking forward to receiving all of those documents. And then our interpretation tagged as such will be, oh, Melanie is back. She came back into the waiting room. Let me just see if Melanie has a final word on this. Okay, going. I think we're going to, Melanie, are you back? Oh, Robin Carter. Hi, Robin Carter. Melanie, are you there? Okay, we're going to call it, folks. I thank you all for participating in everything, and I look forward to further engagement later. Thanks. Okay, we're going to end it right here. Cheerio.